Good morning, everyone. I do also want to thank you for being here. I know how incredibly impacted and how busy you guys are. So I hope this next hour and a half has enough value for you that you're not going to go and say, boy, I should have just kept working. So my hope is that there will be value. For those of you that don't know me and have not met me, my name is Beth Cohen. By trade, I'm a clinical and an organizational psychologist. A lot of the work that I do actually is I travel nationally and I speak and meet thousands of health and human service professionals every year. I used to work at UC Davis and UC Santa Barbara in actually run departments, counseling centers, but now I pretty much exclusively work with Health and Human Services. I've been an instructor and a consultant at the Center for Human Services for probably about, I think, almost 7 years or 8 years. The other thing, the work that I do, and one of the reasons why I think I was invited to do this talk is I'm also a mass trauma expert. I must tell you, as most of you are sitting there going, this is my first pandemic. I am sure that it must be your first pandemic, I would think. Most of you have not been born. I think the last one was in 1918. But I have, and my teams have worked in trauma responses with health and human service leaders, with community leaders and government officials for a number of years. And responses such as the fires, unfortunately, we've done mass murder, we've done terrorism, all different stuff. But I can tell you now, this is definitely my first rodeo on a pandemic. But there are so many similarities in terms of ways of managing and ways of coping that I'm hoping we're going to be able to talk today. So Nancy mentioned that, and here's the agenda. Nancy mentioned some important pieces. One is education and normalizing responses, symptoms, emotions, whatever we want to call them, behaviors, is absolutely vital during times like this. So as you are leading, and I know that you're leading through a tremendous number of dilemmas and challenges, I'm hoping for today that we'll have an opportunity not only for you to sort of get a better understanding of some of the complexities that are going on right now, but also an understanding of why it is that you need to actually change the way you lead right now. And we'll talk about what that looks like. My background is in this neurosciences. Most of my postgraduate work has been looking at social neuroscience, specifically in the workplace. How does the brain work at work? So I'm going to do a quick neuroscience lesson at one point. We're going to talk about psychological and social impacts, some of the maladaptive behaviors, certainly, that we are probably either all doing or seeing, and then psychological immunity. How do you build resilience and psychological immunity in your workforce so that they can be functional and productive during the potential longevity of this process? So I'm going to launch in with a poll, please. I'd like to get an idea of who you are. So we're going to do a poll. What is your role in your organization? Just so I can sort of customize and tailor my discussion as we're going through this. So poll whenever you guys are ready. Salim? Salim, oh, thank you. Okay, there we go. So what is your role in the organization? Supervisor, line staff, manager, deputy director? Awesome. So I have some line staff on. We've got supervisors, managers. It looks like a couple deputies and a couple directors. So that's perfect. You can we'll wait 5 more seconds if you want to respond, and then we can close it. Salim, thank you. And so here are the results. Here's who you are. And so you'll know, line staff, that I'm going to be talking about leadership at some points during our talk, but most of this talk will also be very, very in alignment with what your needs are. So I'm hoping that you'll notice that I'm kind of going back and forth with some of this. So hopefully it would be helpful. Okay, so can we first talk about, I'd like to first talk about the the complexity of this threat. And most of us already know, if we've been listening to medical professionals, and those that are on media, we already know that there is a gigantic physical threat. And we know that that physical threat is obviously taking lives. Unfortunately, it's making people very ill. There is also a psychosocial threat that is going on that many are not speaking about yet. There's a couple more articles that I'm now seeing in some places. People may ask me, why didn't I just call this mental health complexities? Because this is not necessarily, doesn't necessarily just cross over into diagnosis or symptoms that we would think about it from a medical clinical perspective. What all of us right now, as a nation and as a world, are affected and threatened by an invisible threat, which is the virus. But what's interesting about this is that not only are we threatened by a virus, but because of survival and the fear of illness, but we're also now threatened by other people. So other people, and this is real different than most other responses, trauma responses that I have ever done, is other people now are actually, on some level, dangerous. We are alerted. That's one of the reasons that we are staying separate and socially isolated right now, because or I should say physically isolated, because we need to be careful that other people don't spread this. We also know a complexity about resources, and resources I know are occurring at work. You don't have enough resources. If we just think about some safety resources like masks or gloves. But also there's not even enough resources. That's why people are running after toilet paper. They're all afraid, although there's plenty, they're all afraid that we're going to run out of resources. We're also impacted by finances. Some of us that had expected to retire in the next few years may very well not be able to, as a result of some changes in the stock market. Some of you have already been laid off. Not you, but some of your family members have already been laid off, or very concerned about work. And of course, our lifestyles have completely changed, as we know. I don't know about you, but I've never known human service professionals to be working at home. So that is a very, very difference, and all of that it takes to create that. And of course, we also have this unpredictable now and uncertain future. All of this creates a sense of emotional complexity. So and then I want to just spend a moment, because I get the opportunity to talk to eligibility and self-sufficiency professionals every year. I get the opportunity. So I know I've never done your work, but I know somewhat about your work. So I believe that what's also happening for you guys in your work is you're in a perfect storm. I know there's been a significant increase in your workload. And please, if I'm missing some things, feel free to type some in, and we can add some. I believe that we shouldn't have called this, by the way, social distancing. It actually would have been more appropriate to call it physical distancing. But based on the physical distancing and the isolation it creates, we also know now that there is an increase in stress in at-risk families, which is a gigantic concern, because there are a lot of families that would likely might need services, and yet they may not ask for them. They may not know how to ask for them, or they just may not trust asking for them. We also have health and safety issues, both for yourself and for the families served. I have a number actually, I know a number of eligibility professionals actually that are in quarantine. They're not positive for the virus, but they're in quarantine because they came in contact with some people that were already positive, which then, of course, as you know, causes staffing issues. I'm hearing from staff all over the country right now, because I work a lot nationally, about exhaustion, the secondary trauma they're experiencing, and the trauma they're experiencing just from their fears and anxieties. For those of you who don't know what secondary trauma is the trauma that we can experience for those of us in the helping fields. First responders experience it, second responders like yourself experience it, when we are actually working and serving people who have already been traumatized or are in the process of being traumatized. Other things I'm hearing across the nation is staff burnout already, and then unfortunately attrition, because some people are either getting the virus or are quarantined. Other issues that are coming up that I'm hearing about, this rapidly changing communications and protocols increases stress. We're seeing an increase in focus, problems with focus and distraction, a big problem with it, and then which can also then end up, impacting your capability of doing your work accurately. So, so those are just some of the sort of perfect storm places. Again, if I'm missing some that you guys are dealing with, please feel free to type them in. I want to talk about why it is that this time requires atypical leadership. In my business, we call this crisis mobilization. This is where, and this crisis mobilization specifically has a longer time period than most crises will have. So if we're looking at what is an atypical leadership, I want us to be able to talk about it. One piece is that what I'm already hearing, and certainly that you have the job as leaders and supervisors and managers to make sure that the tasks at hand are completed so that your services and your customers can get their needs met. So no one's going to argue in any way, obviously, that the tasks are important. But during times like this, people management is also very important. And what I mean by that is being able to manage some of the emotional, psychological stuff that's going on with your staff so that itself doesn't overwhelm the ability to do their tasks. So we'll have a chance to talk more about that. It's important to know that leaders are actually culture setters. You are culture setters. If you're managing people, you are setting the culture. So I don't mean to add to your plate, my leaders that are out there, but I will say to you that it's very important that you take good care of yourself so that you're able to model that for your staff. Very, very important. And then, of course, message it as well. A lot of the work that I do is, and even working in a national initiative out of Washington, D.C., is about being workforce trauma informed. I've been trying to sort of send this message across the nation now in Health and Human Services for us to be able to sort of change how it is that we look at workforce and understand that many of our workforce are burned out, and also they get traumatized by being again with and servicing people who are in fact also are traumatized and in crisis. So we're going to talk about how leadership and how you can work from a trauma-informed lens. Also, you have to, as a leader right now, look at and begin to lead thinking in terms of how can you continue to build or manage your staff in a way that they can still maintain some resilience. So resilience is vital. And part of my goal actually of doing these programs is that part of our goal is the more people are educated, the more there is more normalization around the responses, the more we can talk about strategies to take care of yourself, to actually manage the stress. Then our goal is to see have a decrease in post-traumatic stress disorder when everything is said and done. We hope actually for an increase in post-traumatic growth, which is merely if something bad has to happen to us, we might as well grow from it. So that's just some of of my and my staff's goal is for you to be able to help your staff, if you're a leader or if you're a line staff, to understand that we need to do things to stave off ending up with some significant and serious potential symptoms. So people will ask me, what is workforce trauma informed? And especially during a crisis, because workforce trauma informed practices are, as you probably may have heard them before, very, very common in social work, very common in behavioral health, also needed and in eligibility and self-sufficiency as well, which is exactly what we actually talk about nationally in a national initiative. Everyone in Health and Human Services is included in looking at being workforce trauma informed. When we have a pandemic like this, obviously, it's very important to know what the trauma and re-traumatization impacts are. The reason I say re-traumatization is that many of us that go into these fields actually have our own histories of primary or personal traumas. So if we have histories of primary and personal traumas, quite often those triggers are going to happen during something like this that's such a severe and significant crisis. Another area that leaders can look at when they're thinking about becoming workforce trauma informed is not just leading your staff, but also being in service to your staff in a different way than perhaps you're used to. And that actually means, I'm going to say it this way, that means that many of us as leaders, and I've been a senior leader, many of us as leaders have been taught that we are not supposed to inquire about personal issues that might be going on with our staff. We are always, of course, to empathize, but we really sort of are not supposed to be very vulnerable, right? Because we're leaders. This is a time where all of that actually needs to be present. There needs to be an increased emotional presence. Leaders must offer that. So if they're needing to offer it, for many of you, it's going to feel incredibly uncomfortable because many of us were not trained. I was a senior leader in human resources at the UC California, Davis and Santa Barbara for many, many years. So I know exactly the messages we would give especially to our new supervisors. But in this case, emotional presence is absolutely imperative. Meaning not only are we going to show empathy, but it's important for you to be able to inquire how people are doing, how your staff are doing, how are they feeling about working at home, what are the challenges they might be dealing with. We also have to be more vulnerable because what will happen is that if you share a little more directly, and of course it has to be an appropriate share, not over the top, but an appropriate sharing of your challenges, you'll increase the chances of your staff feeling safe to share their challenges, while you're also still providing the direction you need. There's also something really interesting that I'm hearing already from all of the staff that I've had a chance to talk to Human Services in the last 3 weeks. Virtual presence is really helping, given that we've had a merger of personal life and professional life. So with this merger, what I'm hearing is for those supervisors, managers, leaders that check in daily, virtually, even if it's 10 minutes with all their staff and all together so that everybody sees each other. Now, some of you may have really large staff, so that's not, that wouldn't be possible, but even being able to check in with groups of your staff, if that's how it worked better, is very important. It's very important. Here's some of the information I'm hearing. Line staff are saying they feel more connected, they feel more included if they can see each other and talk to each other. And also they feel more included and connected to you as their leader if they can visually see you and even just hear your voice. So I'm recommending, and I have recommended, that ideally early in the morning of a workday, you start out, if it's going to be a task-oriented meeting, of course it might be longer. Perhaps you might even want emotionally oriented meetings. Would just be, guys, we're going to talk for a half hour or an hour about how we're all doing and what our struggles and challenges are. Let's see if we can address some. And that's what we would call debriefs. I said earlier, leaders set the cultures. So part of modeling is not only modeling your own authenticity during this time, but also modeling being adaptive. What we find in disasters, in crises, is that those that are the most adaptive actually retain the most resilience, and they actually deal with it better. They cope with all these changes better. So if you find, any of you out there find that you have sort of, or your family has told you, or your friends, you sort of have a controlling side, you will know that it could be more difficult if you have a sense that you need to control what's going on versus being able to adapt to what's going on and pivot and move and be flexible. We all know that we've had a merger of personal and professional life, which is absolutely unique, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And also, what's very important during this time, if you're going to be workforce trauma informed, is being able to address the mental and the physical well-being. Always letting your staff know that you're just keeping that in mind. It's not that you have to address everything that's going on, but just that you tell them that you're keeping it in mind. Also, please make sure that you have all updated resources and the supports, EAP, how someone can make an appointment with an EAP, Employees Assistance Program, if somebody needs to take time off, being able to have access to HR, et cetera, et cetera. Nancy, I'm going to stop here and just see if anybody has any questions or thoughts.
So far, no questions are in the chat window, but we'd love to take a few. So you can either unmute yourself or type something in the chat window. Even if you have a reaction or a response.
Hi, Lisa.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good. Hey, I have a quick a comment/question. So the idea of checking in and actually seeing each other's faces, that's something that my team has really tried to practice. And recently, one of my supervisors experienced a little pushback, actually pretty significant pushback on that, not wanting to be using the camera.
Mm-hmm.
I feel a little awkward about it. But do you have any tips for us?
Yeah, I'm actually glad you're asking that question. So you have to remember that we're so incredibly different, right? All of us are. Some of us are more on the extroverted scale, where connecting with people actually creates energy for us. Others are more on an introverted scale, or we're just having a bad hair day, and we don't want to connect. I believe you need to give people permission to still be on, but not necessarily have their cameras on. Thoughts about that, Lisa?
Nope, I think that's fair. And this is all new to us, and so we're figuring it out.
These are all, but they're incredibly important questions, because what we don't want to do is increase stressors at home. Remember also, some people may not be comfortable with what's going on behind them in their homes. And that I've seen. I have met more children, dogs, cats, some rabbits. I mean, everyone also has to be able to adapt to the fact that we have a merger now of home and office, and we're not wearing those professional masks like we usually are. So that's another important piece.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else, Nancy?
Beth, we also got a, oops, it just disappeared. Just some vulnerability of that it's a scary time, and people are, just a need to keep going. Somebody else, Erica made a comment that it's been helpful for a supervisor to ask how she's feeling or doing on a regular basis throughout the day. So getting personal feels needed and comfortable right now. And then Corey just chimed in and agreed that she struggled with Zoom meetings due to babies screaming nonstop. And I mean, it's, we've seen the bingo games, who has the first baby to cry or a dog to bark, or, like the doorbell rings and everything happens all at the same time.
So I'm going to ask you guys, and we're going to address this a little later too, but I'm going to ask you guys to work on changing your rules. You have to be able to work on changing your rules right now. You will not have the presence that you would usually have at work. And what I mean by presence is that you are going to get interrupted. I've had meetings where fathers all of a sudden are in a meeting with me, and the next thing you know, they're running after their little ones that are running, and they're still talking to me. But all of that you can say up front. In this meeting, I'm going to apologize to you guys if I am interrupted, but here's what's going on in my household right now. And I promise you, other crap is going on in everybody else's household, and you will make people feel better. Because if your household isn't perfect, they get not to be perfect too. So I hope that helps in response. But we have to be able to work on the shame around that, which could take us a while. All right, Nancy, if it's okay, I'm gonna move a little forward here and then we'll stop again, guys. Thank you for your questions and your comments. So if we're talking about authentic and adaptive leadership for a moment, I want to talk about it from a perspective of task orientation as well as people orientation, right? So one thing that I am incredibly impressed by, but also actually concerned for all of you, is that you have been amazing at navigating the changes you need to do. It's been incredible, and you've done them quickly, but I also know you're paying a price for them. Now, I know your work where you always are sort of this triad. You're always working between community needs and agency needs and then staff needs. I know that that's sort of the complexity of your work, but right now those needs are so high in every one of the areas that I need you to know that you will, if you are a perfectionist, this is a time to really work on that. You will not do this perfectly. I don't even know what perfect is right now. I don't think any of you do either. In your homes, whether you're homeschooling children, which by the way, we decided yesterday is not the right term. You have children that are at home having to do school. You are not doing the traditional homeschooling. It's really an important difference, which we can also mention later. But the needs are so greatly exceeding your capacities that this is a time to be incredibly kind, nurturing, and compassionate to yourselves and to those that are working with you. So another piece too is being able to help identify reality versus what is the desired state. I know the desired state for eligibility and self-sufficiency is usually getting those needs very quickly met for your customers who are coming in and are hungry or are needing money, and you are providing, the goal is to provide it as quickly as possible. I believe now we have a different reality than perhaps the desired state that you're used to working in. And if that's true for you guys, how can you engage in conversations about what are the realistic expectations given that resources are, needs are greatly exceeding resources right now. Now, if I go more to the people-oriented side, these are the two on the left. So the people-oriented side is for my leaders and my supervisors and managers. I said this a little earlier, the more you are willing to share your constructive self-reflections, what it is you're learning about yourself during this process, constructive disclosures, here are some of the challenges that we're dealing with, and constructive responses to those that are talking to you about their own challenges, which sometimes it's just listening and saying, I really understand, that sounds really difficult, and empathizing. It's not that you're going to be able to fix a lot of what's going on, but the acknowledgement and validation for many of us is exactly what we're looking for. So also don't forget to validate small wins. One of my concerns, and I said this earlier to you guys, one of my concerns, and I know that some of your work is very laden with data, it's very data driven. And some of my concerns is that I think you guys need to validate some of the small wins, because my fear is, because concentration and focus is so greatly impacted during these times, and I'll talk to you about why that is in a little bit, that you might need to validate small wins, because I'm not sure you're going to see as many big wins as you're used to. So I'm going to offer right now sort of the spectrum of psychological responses that certainly I'm seeing. Psychologists have been seeing. I've had managers and supervisors be able to tell me. Our line staffers talking about it. So take a look at here at some of and try to identify for yourself, where are some of the hot spots for you right now? So many of our what I call youths, our millennials, are still having that invulnerability myth. My son he's 25, and it's taken me a lot to be able to say to him, don't go out. You're working from home, don't go out. Or here's what you need to do if you do go out. Because it's really cracking open some of that invulnerability that we all felt, and I know I used to feel when I was younger. If you take a look here, many of us are grieving. Many of us were grieving, and we have grief and loss right now. That's part of the process. And part of the grief actually is we're grieving what was a month ago, and not even having certainty that we will ever go back to that lifestyle, these lifestyles. Some of us are grieving the losses of people we love as a result of them passing. Some are already grieving. My mother just recently passed away, so I'm already in my grief and loss process, and now experiencing so much of the losses that are going on, to the point where I can't even go to her home to be able to do what's necessary to take care of it. If guys see this word Schadenfreude is a German term, but it's a term that some of us are, some of us will actually have experience happiness for other people's pain and suffering. I don't think most of us are like that, but I certainly have met some people that actually are getting some delight out of it. Don't ask. Humor. We are looking to laugh as much as we can in my household. I invite you to watch funny videos. There's some great ones, by the way, to just, put on comedies. But there's guilt and there's social isolation. I've talked to so many health and human service professionals over the last few weeks that are really, the longer they're going, the more isolated they're feeling. I've also talked to some county government officials who have been worried that some of the issues that are going on could lead to violence. Certainly we know hoarding, and I'll stop there because I'm gonna just tell you this piece, and then we're gonna do another poll. It's very important to know that people who have pre-existing conditions, whether it's trauma, anxiety, depression, grief, they could also be physical conditions, diseases that actually get triggered. They could be in remission and get triggered as a result of severe amounts of stress and uncertainty. That people who have pre-existing conditions are also at a bit of a higher risk than some others. So let me move to a poll for a moment. I'd like to know which reactions you have been experiencing. Now, this is a multiple choice poll, so you can answer as many or as few as you would like. But please just take a look and let's get a sense of.
Beth, also while people are responding, there have been a couple of comments that you've made some great points about shame, and we got one comment about how there is still some pressure from top down from leadership to perform at a certain, I'm assuming to perform at a certain level or not have screaming babies, etc. And I am so glad to see so many people that are on this call that are not just leadership, but to see all levels of staff on this call.
Agreed.
And at the same time, I think that there is a real call to action for leadership to step up. And so for this webinar, I would really just, the title is, leading through COVID. So this would be a great sort of nudge to your supervisor or your leadership to say, hey, I sat in on this, but it was really intended for leadership. Yeah, you might want to check this out. So if you want to talk a little bit about other ways, strategies are dealing with that, Beth, that'd be great.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about shame from a number of different angles, actually. But also, I agree with your comment. With your comments, is that we need your leadership to hear this stuff.
Right. Yes.
But this is not. But out of fairness to your leadership, for those of you that are, this is not necessarily a automatic way of management.
Right.
In fact, sometimes, you and I both know, Nancy, we're told certain ways we're supposed to manage people just based in human resources stuff, right? And based in policy. And so this is an outlier. I agree with you.
Yeah, this one is a hard one. And I think at the same time, offering some patience and grace for people who are attempting to lead through this crisis, right? That everyone needs some grace.
And can I add another piece to that? Also, please don't forget that every one of your bosses, no matter where they are, in the organization, they are all also traumatized, trying to deal with what's going on in their households, potentially also, you know, having their kids, having to do school with their kids. I mean, they're having the same stressors, afraid that their family members, some are caregiving, older parents. So everyone is in the same state. So I agree with you. We all need to have compassion for each other.
Okay, I'm going to share the polling results.
If we see this, guys, exhaustion and sleep has been a gigantic, and this is our, for just this week, this is my fifth actually, no, fourth presentation that I've given. So I've touched probably almost 1,000 lives already, already this week, and exhaustion and sleep difficulty is very common. Please know that it's growing out of this sort of not only sense of being out of control, but fear and anxiety and an inability for us to stop thinking about it, stop being vigilant. Also, you'll see here 52% talked about difficulties with focus and productivity, and that is another area that we need to be able to forgive ourselves around, and supervisors, leaders, managers, you guys need to also expect that there will be a reduction in productivity. There will be a reduction. So that means, and that's where I come back to these realistic expectations based on how many challenges that are going on at one time. It will not be business as usual. Even if we need it to be, it will not be. So of course, some people are irritable and angry and frustrated. And then of course, there's some real experience of some sadness and depression itself. I'm gonna close this, and I'm gonna move on to another. Now this one's more for leaders, so I'm sorry, line staff, but what reactions have your staff been experiencing? What are they telling you that they're experiencing? And if you want to pull up the poll, you guys have a moment.
It should be up. It's not?
No, I'm not seeing it, so maybe it's up for others.
Let's see. It says attendees are now viewing the questions, but nobody's doing it. So I'm going to say it's not. So let me try one more time.
Problem.
It's funny. Okay. Relaunch polling.
There it is. Thank you,
Okay,
Nancy.
sweet.
Thank you, Nancy.
Sure.
So now this question is about your staff. For those that have staff in here. And this is an important question, because this is what I call the equalizing question. This allows everybody, and normalizing question. This allows everyone to understand that what it is that you reported and what it is your staff are going through, the exact same things, the same responses, the same emotions, the same behavior issues.
Okay, we'll close it here in another 5 seconds.
That sounds good.
One last person just got in their answer. Okay.
Hi, thank you. All right, so we're sharing poll results. So here we have similar, 87% are talking about, which is interesting, the higher individuals talking about the fear, anxiety. If you guys recall, on the first poll, exhaustion, sleep difficulty was a little inched ahead. But if you take a look, anywhere between 87% and 34%, that how impacted we all are. We all are. With having to manage this ongoing invisible threat, on top of still being able to provide the services that we know people need so desperately. Thank you, Nancy.
Yep.
So let me talk a little bit about maladaptive coping for a moment. I don't know about you guys, but I have been eating things that I don't usually eat, and enjoying every moment of it. I'm sure I've gained weight, but I'm too afraid actually to go on the scale. I actually did go on the scale a couple of days ago, and I didn't gain as much as I had thought, so it was helpful to actually get reality, but I don't like to go on very often. And part of that is just self-medicating. And many of us do. We do different things to self-medicate in times of stress. I know some that are gaming as self-medicating. They're just staying and gaming or watching TV and just to be able to sort of numb out. Alcohol, drugs, all of these are maladaptive. Some are maladaptive. If you're eating healthy food, probably it's adaptive. I'm not. And so certain things we're doing, if we do them too much, it also can be maladaptive. Another maladaptive coping mechanism, and I don't know how many of you guys are doing this, but I clocked myself early on, and I was checking news on my phone about 25 times a day. Now, news was changing, but it was absolutely exhausting me. I was staying in a constant state of feeling anxious, uncomfortable, and part of it was just an overconsumption of news. I still look at news. It's important to read it, and I read it 3 times a day, and then I go on about my day. Because within 3 times a day, morning, noon, and in the evening, I can probably get a pretty good idea of what's happened for the day and what changes are going on. Also, some of us can become more controlling, and that's not an unusual behavior at all when we are out of control. Remember that we have all learned ways and responses, right? If I put my clinical psychologist hat on for a moment, we've all have these defenses that we use to be able to make it through our lives. And most of us have made it through our lives quite successfully. Some of us control more when we feel out of control. Now, at work, we call that micromanaging. And that is going to be a problem at this time. Now, that doesn't mean that some staff may need more direction, other staff may need less, but if you're noticing that you're feeling like you need to control even the work more or your staff more, you're going to find that absolutely exhausting and probably quite disappointing. Now, what's interesting to me about micromanaging is that most micromanagers don't know that they're micromanagers. They're the ones that really don't know that they're micromanaging. So something just to be aware of, or maybe you can ask people that you trust whether or not that's if they're noticing you're feeling like you need more control lately. Isn't my management style changing? Social isolation versus physical distance. I have a lot of health and human service professionals across the nation talking about how lonely they are, especially those that live alone, that or they have someone home, but it's not a big family around them. They're experiencing great amounts of social isolation. I try to explain that those individuals need to be on things like Zoom more. They need to be calling people, texting people that they love and care about wherever they are, and being able to connect with people perhaps that you haven't connected with in a very long time. I promise you, if you're experiencing it, there's so many other people that are experiencing it too that would love for you to give them just reach out and connect. Now, this is a sort of another one that's been very, very maladaptive, and actually not only has it been maladaptive, but it's been harmful to our nation, and that is some people resisting or ignoring medical advice. So I say this because we go back here to what makes people ignore and Nancy, there's like blue stuff on my screen. Do you guys see that? Oh, okay. Anyway, so I'll just keep going. So what creates the resistance or ignoring medical advice? We go back to here, shame again. We go back to some shame sometimes, and fear of exclusion. So, it's if your social group really hasn't been following medical advice, it's going to be harder for me to follow medical advice if my social group wasn't. Also, that myth of invulnerability I talked about earlier. Also, this sense that it's kind of contagious. We will do what other people, or we will conform to what other people are usually doing around us. Again, so that conformity can also be a problem, because we have to be able to think during this time very, very independently. However, to take best care of ourselves, especially given everybody's different health issues, ages, are you immune compromised? What do you need to do personally to take best care of yourself? But conformity is really interesting because we are actually wired to conform. we are wired to conform. So that means that we have to stay that much more conscious and awake of making sure that we're not conforming in areas where we actually might be causing harm to ourselves and possibly to others. I want to play you a video in a moment. And this is a real study. It came through Brain Games in 2017, but it's a real study about how it is that people will unconsciously, we all will unconsciously conform because we don't like the anxiety that gets created as a result of feeling or potentially feeling excluded.
To answer that question, we set up a hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you? After just 3 beats, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
I don't know, something's going on.
Okay, now she's alone. The crowd is gone and nobody is watching her except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do?
There she goes.
She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there. Now, watch what happens when we introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
Have a seat and look at us. Thanks so much. Everybody was doing it, so I thought I was supposed to.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do? Get the cameras rolling as more unsuspecting patients arrived. And slowly but surely, what began as a random rule for this woman has now become the social norm for everyone in this waiting room. Here to explain what's going on in their brains is Jonah Berger of the University of Pennsylvania.
This sort of internalized form of herd behavior is part of what we call social learning. Starting at a very early age, when we see members of our group perform a task, our brains literally reward us for following in their footsteps.
When I saw everybody stand up, I felt like I needed to join them. Otherwise, I'm like excluded. Once I decided to go with it, then I felt much more comfortable.
Conformity is how we become socialized, but it can also cause us to develop bad habits or eat fast wrong.
And it's why even this rebel, who wasn't standing for any of this nonsense, eventually joined the ranks. And the only thing more shocking than seeing how easily conformity affects the way you act is that similar forces are subconsciously shaping the way you think right now. To answer that,
So some of you may find that you could see why it is that some of us are are having difficulty making some of the changes. If you think about our households even and how different our households are right now, right? Even roles and how some of you may have kind of shifted roles in how you might be, you know, those that may not usually cook or cooking, those and usually somebody who might not be as involved. Right now, my daughter, my 19-year-old is doing so much more in the household than she's ever done. She can't wait to go back to school, but she is, because she's home. And so expectations are also changing, not just at work, but also at home. I'm going to move to just a quick lesson, if you guys don't mind, on the neuroscience of why it is that we are experiencing what we're experiencing. And it'll be a good 5 minutes, and then I'll move on. I want to talk about these three parts of the brain. This is not our real brain, but these three parts are important for understanding. The triune brain is an important model to understand what happens when we have excessive fear and threat and anxiety. So as we know, we take in information from our eyes, our nose, our ears. We hear things, right? We taste things. We might feel things. So the neocortex, information comes in through the neocortex. It makes up 76% of our brain. And when it comes in through that, when we are not upset and it's just coming in, it comes in as logical, rational kind of information. We can synthesize information, we can reason, we can make decisions, it's easier. We kind of have, so it's kind of our wise brain, what one would call our wise brain. Now, if information, and please know too that there's oxygen and glucose that are just running around here. Now, if information that comes in as a direct threat, it doesn't necessarily come in as much through this part of the brain as it will through a small area called the limbic system. The limbic system actually can wreak havoc for many of us if, in fact, when the oxygen and glucose runs to here and we don't have enough still running in our, what we call our wise brain. Because if you think about, even when you have a strong emotion, and you say to yourself, oh, wait a minute, this is not the best way for me to handle this. That actually is your neocortex kicking in to actually tell your limbic system, don't behave. You don't need to really freak out about this because it's not this is not appropriate, or it's not well, it's not good, whatever. Now, when we get limbic activity, something else also happens. The reptilian brain, our reptilian brains, our oldest part of our brain, will either get ready to fight, freeze, or flee. We will automatically get ready. Human beings want to survive by nature. And so we will get ready and our bodies will get ready, as well as our mind will get ready to fight, freeze, or flee. As a result, what happens is, and I'll show you here for a moment, as a result, what will happen is that if we all of a sudden have this real strong emotion, trauma memories, all this fear, what will happen is our ability to emotionally regulate, our ability to feel that self-control a lot of times we're feeling, even to make decisions, all of that will actually go offline. It's called loss of top-down management in my business. It'll go offline, and this is going to take over for us. So rather than just being sort of in action, we'll go out of action and we go into reaction. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but that is where the world is right now, is many of us are in emotional, significant sort of states where strong emotional fear states, traumatic states even, where we are going to be more reflexive. We are going to have reactions easier, where our behaviors are going to be different. You might be watching your behaviors you don't even recognize. And I want to tell you that that's absolutely common for what's happening right now. Now, we also have to talk about, but how do I get back up to this state? And we're going to talk about that as well. I want to also talk about what happens with our nervous systems, what happens with our bodies during this time. So what's happening, actually, we have two sides of our nervous system, but what's on right now is what we call the sympathetic nervous system. That sympathetic nervous system is our survival part of our nervous system. If there is a real threat, we'll do whatever it takes. Human beings will do whatever it takes to survive. So and what will happen then is we will get into what we call a vigilant state, or we will have sympathetic nervous system vigilance, meaning that our bodies are so revved up. We are secreting adrenaline, we're secreting a lot of cortisol, which is stress hormone, and our body is ready to react at any point that we might need to. The problem, though, is that if you stay in that level of vigilance for too long, you will start to get ill, you won't feel well, you'll notice a whole bunch of different changes. You won't sleep well, you will stay vigilant, so you can't turn off, or better known as the parasympathetic nervous system state. We need to be able to allow ourselves, our staff, to go into a relaxed state, to be restorative, so that when we are actually not needing to be working as difficult or hard, or we're just kind of hanging out, to be able to actually experience some healing and possibly even a little bit more balance. So we need to look at this in terms of I'm going to move back here. We want to look at this in terms of how is it that you can get here more often. And I'm going to just invite you for now, for the next 30 minutes until we end, is one way of getting there, just as we've been told by medical professionals to wash our hands so that we don't spread potentially get the virus if we have it off of us. As a psychologist, I will tell you that if you've increased your hand washing, if you increase your focus on your breathing, you will be able to go from here to here. So all I'm going to invite you guys to do while I'm speaking for the next 30 minutes is to focus on your breathing. I might remind you at some points, but also when you notice that you can listen and focus at the same time. And at some points, you'll just start to think about something else. And if you recall, oh my goodness, I want to just go back to the breath. So I'm going to invite you guys to do that while I continue on. Another part that's really important for us to talk about in terms of resilience is being able to and the value of being able to see things from a whole bunch of different lenses. If we can start to look at things with more adaptive, as I was saying earlier, and realistically adaptive, we call that adaptive realists, which I like. That's what we need to become as leaders right now. And that's what you need to become as line staff as well, as to be adaptive. So if you peer through some lens, let me give you a few lenses. So when home becomes office, what happens? When home becomes office, I said earlier, our masks come off. We can't appear as professional as we want to. We may not be able to appear as together as we want to. I don't know about you guys, if you're all working at home, but I have a nice sweater on every day, and I have my sweatpants on. I have 2 pairs of favorite sweatpants that I'm wearing, and they're my favorites, and that's what I wear underneath because you can't see that. And that's what's happening. Now, some stuff people can see. I ought to put a question, the next polling question, Nancy, ought to be, how many of you are wearing sweatpants? Also, we all know that it takes a village to raise children. So for those of you who have children at home, you've lost your village. For many of you have lost your village, and you are not used to that. I know you're used to the village being school, village being other family members or friends, village being play dates, all of that, and we've lost our villages. So if you're finding it hard to sort of juggle everything, please know that it ought to be hard, because this is a very difficult time. We are not used to losing our villages or those that support us in making our home and our families and our work work. We also want to look at staying flexible, creative, having a tremendous amount of self-compassion, coming from the lens of self-compassion, making sure that coming from a lens of being able to connect with your teammates, because they also are feeling the exact same thing. And they may be also feeling out of control and uncomfortable and would love to talk with you for a few minutes. Also, to be able to accommodate for the variations of your workday. Whether it means that you're working in the evening sometime because you have to, if you guys are, if you can't do a full 8 hours, have you had to make your day shorter? All of those things you need to consider is, how can I accommodate? How can you even accommodate if there's children in the home, or if you're caregiving, elderly family, how can you accommodate that so that you can also focus and be productive, somewhat productive? Here's another lens. Let me go through an anthropology lens for a moment. Okay, now this woman, we know, maybe some of you are like this woman. She's purchasing groceries for elderly neighbors. Now, that is that altruism, that some people experience. Many of us in these industries, we like to be in service to others. She's purchasing groceries for elderlies, which is wonderful, and she's volunteering and she's giving. But we have another lens that we can look at, because does anybody remember this guy who took every bit of any of the supplies that we needed and he purchased them, as many as possible. And then what he did is he hiked up the price and wanted to resell them for great amounts of profit. For example, I saw Clorox wipes. At one point, Clorox wipes were $90. They were asking $90 for an $8 Clorox wipes. So, and by the way, he ended up apologizing. He got so many death threats that he ended up apologizing and stopped. I don't know if he also realized that it wasn't appropriate to do during a time, but he certainly apologized and stopped. Another lens. Toilet paper has to be a lens we have to talk about. I hope you guys don't mind. It's an odd topic. I've never talked about this topic before in any presentation I've given, but I think we need to. So I did some research on theories. One theory was that people were hoarding toilet paper because there is an underlying unconscious contamination fear that people have. We know there's a virus coming in, and there's some sense that even we use toilet paper to not to experience contamination. There's also was an underlying, some other theories were underlying social concerns and shame around bathroom habits. So I thought that was interesting. Obviously, the need to feel in control, or at least to perceive that you're in control. Why people chose toilet paper, I have no idea. But I can tell you maybe some of the whys it became so important for other people to get toilet paper. And that is because it became a competition. There was great amounts of uncertainty suddenly that there won't be enough for us. And it also ignited unfairness, which really, quite honestly, angered a lot of people. Really angered a lot of people, that level of unfairness. So because people were just kind of taking as much as they could until the store started to control it. I will forever wonder about toilet paper and why that became an issue. I can understand hand sanitizers and soaps, but not toilet paper. But I'll tell you, quite honestly, I want to play you a video for a moment, because when we start to look at the sense of unfairness, even what we find is that not only are we wired to not like unfairness and to scan for it, so are animals wired for it. So I wanted to show you Franz de Waal is one of my favorite researchers. I actually asked him if he wouldn't mind me using this video of some research that he did. And imagine how we are as humans, and just watch how a capuchin monkey reacts to experiencing unfairness. Oh. There we go.
So a final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs and with birds and with chimpanzees, but with Sarah Brosnan we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group. They know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now, if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, that's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is a monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. Rock to us now, gets again cucumber.
There we go.
She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
So what's very interesting about this research study, to be very honest with you, many people in human services will ask me, well, did the capuchin monkey ever get the grape that she wanted? And not only did the capuchin monkey get the grape that she was hoping for and desired, but the other monkey actually provided her and shared the grapes at the end of that process, which is really fascinating if you think about it, because if in fact we are wired on some level to actually give to others and share, the times we won't will usually be those times when we are in the most significant threat. When we are in the most significant threat, we will be potentially less sharing. So as we wrap up this time, I want us to talk some about leadership communications. Just as a sort of a review again, empathizing, being able to be vulnerable, talk to your staff about not only their concerns, but the reality of the concerns, of the reality of not only the tasks, but as well as all of the challenges that are going on with how it is we're working and the personal people challenges. Normalizing the responses is very, very important. Remember, the goal is to be able to maintain some level of resilience during this long-standing period of time, so that when we are all going out again, we are still feeling intact emotionally and still feeling like we have now the flexibility and the adaptability to go back. My best guess is none of us are going to go back to the exact same lifestyles in maybe potentially a good way. We actually call that post-traumatic growth. We make changes based. Organizations can make changes. They can have their post-traumatic growth, and so can individuals and families. Reinforce official guidelines on health protections, please. That's happening in certain places, and it is creating a tremendous amount of unsafety for staff if there isn't a reinforcement of these official guidelines. Assessing psychosocial health concerns, as we talked earlier, please, this is a time where if you are noticing that someone is having some emotional issues, psychological issues, this is a time to offer them to go to counseling, to offer them the EAP resources. Offer solidarity and resilience messages. Please promote the mental health resources like the EAP or their other benefits, their other benefits if they need. And I want to move for a moment to you now, for you leaders, is in order to take care of your staff, you must take care of yourself. So if we talk about that in terms of taking care of yourself, let's talk about some strategies for all of us, whether we're line staff, whether we are supervising, managing, or leading. One thing that I want you guys to be very, very aware of during this time, and by the way, are you still focusing on your breathing? Because if you can go back to focusing on your breathing while I'm speaking, I hope that some of you are starting to feel a little more relaxed. When you focus on your breathing, try to let all the air out of your lungs. And I'm going to move for a moment right here to mindfulness practices. I have taught 21,000 people, I'm up to, teaching meditation, mindfulness meditation in workplaces. I only teach in workplaces. And I say this because mindfulness practices are so powerful right now that I am recommending it for everyone. I'm recommending it that you even take a break during the day and do 30 minutes, have staff be able to go on to Zoom and do it. Nancy and I have been talking about doing some videos on mindfulness that we can even send out to you guys. So we've been discussing how to create that. Mindfulness practices are so important because it's what the military uses to stop threat, to stop the post-traumatic stress that goes on for people. It helps stop trauma. It helps manage trauma. I shouldn't say stop trauma. It helps manage trauma. So I invite you guys to just follow your breathing, keep following your breathing, or go onto YouTube and do some mindfulness practices. And mindfulness doesn't have to just be sitting quietly. It can also be yoga. It can be Tai Chi, which is wonderful movement. It can be going out into nature. Research on nature recently is that even having, I just read a research study that even having on your table at work, a flower or a plant actually helps people go into their, where we talked earlier, into their parasympathetic nervous system state, into that relaxed state. Very, very healthy. Of course, I know everybody needs to exercise. We also want to keep assessing our own emotional states and ask for help if we need. And for some of us, that's not really easy to do. I'm a big believer in distractions. Find distractions. We have one whole area upstairs now in our house where we have been painting rocks, and now we're going through all the plants we have. We're painting all the planter, everything that's sitting in the plants. So, I mean the planter holders. That's something we would never usually do, but we're actually enjoying it. Remember to do virtual social events and connections. What I mean by that is that I've talked to people who have done virtual coffees and teas. I've talked to people who have done virtual happy hours. People are doing all different kinds of things. They are singing on there. I know a choir that now gets together and they sing. They're still on and singing. So please be creative. Think outside the box. I'm also recommend that 2 lists that we keep daily. 2 lists, and it doesn't have to be long. One is a gratitude list, because many of us are realizing what we had in our lives and right now what we don't have. But we need a gratitude list. And not to forget that we still have a lot happening and a lot in our lives that's actually enough. The other list is a to-do list. Now that to-do list, I have a to-do list and I haven't gotten much done, but I'm okay with that because I still redid my to-do list, and maybe I'll get to some of it, which we have a couple things. And then of course, an acceptance of what we can and what we can't control. And we need to know actually what we can and we can't control. And there needs to be some level of being able to acknowledge that during this period of time, that is a state that we're going to need to tolerate. We don't have to like it. We don't even have to accept it, but we need to reconcile that we're going to have to tolerate it, because if we don't tolerate it, we're going to have larger social and larger emotional impacts. I told you earlier, it's all about the breath, so I hope you guys are still practicing breathing. And let me show you in terms of, we are out of control in a lot of areas. I tried to come up with some of them that were sort of just some that I could think of. But we are also in control in a lot of areas. Like, we're in control at trying and working on understanding that we need to be relaxed at different points of time during the day, and we need to work on that. We need to make sure that we are still socially connected. As human beings, we are wired to be social. Doesn't mean we have to be on with 40 people, you know, it just means that we need to make sure that we are connecting with people that we care about, like, and want to know how they're doing, or want you to know how them to know how you're doing. It's important to be able to ask for help. We have control over how we spend some of our time at home, at least. We have control over how we problem solve some of these issues that are coming up. We have control over our own self-care, even though most of us in these industries are not very good with self-care. We are wired to be, from a neuroscience perspective, we are much more wired to be in service to others than we are to be in service to ourselves. So that takes some work for us. We're in control of the protective practices, how much you're not only going to leave your home, but how are you going to take care of what's even coming in your home, what you need protectively. We're in charge, believe it or not, and we have control over our attitudes, although sometimes that feels impossible to me, about the amounts news that we consume, as well as some of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And we are also in control, except that some of us have to work really harder at being more adaptive. So I'm going to tell you today that all of you on here are pioneers. Our leaders are pioneers because they are absolutely navigating uncharted territory in terms of how do you lead during this time. The destination is difficult. The course map changed. The compass does not have a due north right now. We're used to having a north that we're following. Timelines are off. Our roles are different. And for my leaders, you are pioneers. But for my line staff, you are pioneers too, because you have to figure out how you can still be productive, create the needs that we now have for those that are coming in for services that are in crisis. Some of those we know you would have probably not even met maybe 2-3 months ago. There will be a whole different demographic that will need services. And you are a pioneer because you're the ones that need to be able to chart all that and make it happen. So I want to thank you for your service. And also leave you with this thought. I know that we will get through this. We will be inspired and motivated, but I also know that we're going to get through this, and I'm hoping we do that in remembrance of all those that we lost to COVID-19, because that is very difficult for all of us to know that people are dying as a result of this virus. I want to provide you with some great apps and resources for a moment before we open up for some questions. This is called the Provider Resilience app. Actually, the military created this, but this is also relevant to you. First of all, up here, I love this app. It's free. You can download it. And this app tells you how many days it's been since you took a vacation. But it also has some great videos. It has some fantastic questionnaires that will actually allow you to graph where you are. And burnout, on secondary trauma, on job satisfaction. I just invite you all to download that. Here's another what's called the Healthy Minds app. This is actually probably one of the best, and it's free, so I like that. I like that as well. The Center for Healthy Minds has done neuroscience research. Richard Davidson at the U of Wisconsin in Madison for many years, and he finally put out an app based on that research on how to meditate and how to do mindfulness practices. And it is fantastic. And it teaches in such a nice and quite simplified way. Here are some other well-being apps that might be helpful. This PTSD coach is fantastic. It's the Veterans Administration put that out. Here are some other meditation apps, some activity apps, some sleep apps that are really helpful for you. And then right here at the end are some disaster resource apps, as well as please know that there's not only a disaster distress helpline, but there's also a Talk With Us helpline for people who want to talk to a crisis counselor and need to get someone right away. So I'm going to stop here, Nancy, and we can open it up for questions if anyone has any questions. If those of you who are going off before that, I want to thank you for participating and for spending time with me this morning. I know that probably means that you have to go back and you have more workload than you otherwise would probably want to. But I thank you so much, and I hope that there was value.
So far, we don't have any questions coming in, but we've had a pretty active chat window with people just giving ideas and finding some humor and lightness. And
can you tell us some ideas? Would that be?
Well, ideas like having our very own Amy suggested having some big, large Zoom craft sessions. And
oh, yes, Amy, I'll join. I love that idea.
We talked about not only toilet paper, but flour, and everybody's home making chocolate chip cookies and
awesome
bread and that kind of thing. So, and then we're just getting lots of people writing in appreciation. So if anybody has a question, you can unmute yourself and ask away. The chat window is going too fast. Oh, I will. Somebody just asked if we'll be offering additional webinars. We are recording this, and we will send out a recording, the link to the recording, either later today or early tomorrow, so you can send on. We are not sure about offering additional webinars. We'll see. Please be in touch with us here at UC Davis. Most of you and Eligibility especially, I think, have county contacts here and let us know what your needs are. We're talking about doing some of these webinars. We can tailor them for your county. We can do some meditation or different mindfulness or wellness kinds of things for your staff. So just let us know, or we can do it as a region as well. So just let us know. Keep us posted. Watch for more.
And please be safe and be well out there, please, all of us.